Greetings to the anointed. The most dangerous kind of power is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. And that's exactly what you embody. While they were out there clashing for crumbs, fighting over attention, status, and shallow influence, you were already 10 steps ahead, moving in silence. You weren't just playing the game differently. You were playing an entirely different game. While they played checkers in public, leaping over each other for momentary wins, you were deep in a private chess match with destiny, setting up a checkmate no one saw coming. They thought they had you figured out, thought they could trap you, twist your name, provoke a reaction. But what they didn't know is that you don't fight on their turf. You don't flinch in public chaos. You operate in shadows, in symbols, in timing. Every insult hurled, every setup they thought would break you, it was just another piece falling into place on your board. You never needed to shout. You only needed to stay aligned. And now, the rewards start to pour in, quietly, precisely. Ironic, isn't it, that one of the world's most watched men, Elon Musk himself, just unknowingly placed a penthouse in your hands, not out of pity, not by accident, but because the energy around you magnetizes what's yours, one way or another. This isn't just luxury, it's alignment. The universe cashing in all those moments you held back, stayed sharp and moved with sacred precision. The loudest tongues usually look shocked when they eventually choke on their own words. Isn't that funny? You were not required to answer. You didn't need to return the clap. Why? Because you were playing for leverage, and they were playing for likes. We're going to reveal today why it was never cowardly to keep your lips shut. Rather, it was a calculated tactic, and how their own ignorance checkmated every step you took when they were not watching, bringing them just where you wanted them. Hold on tight. This isn't your typical, keep quiet, keep your peace message. Under the garb of wisdom, this is military strategy. Let's begin. First of all, you play for position. They play for attention. The difference between you and them is that you play for position while they play for attention. You know, being noticed is a major obsession for most individuals. They want attention, admiration, and envy. To be relevant for 5 minutes, they will sacrifice their allegiance, their dignity, and even their mental health. They pick battles to stay in the limelight and publish, to get praise. They believe that being loud gives them authority, and that respect is somehow correlated with attention. However, they are unaware of the fact that attention is only a diversion and not a source of strength. You're going in a different direction while they're occupied with gaining influence and attempting to become viral for nothing. Position is what you're playing for. You care about who is counting on you when it matters, not who is observing you. Silent triumphs are piling up for you. You're monitoring people's vulnerabilities, understanding their patterns, and putting yourself in a position where you can influence results rather than dialogue. They are unable to identify you because of this. They assume you're not working since you're not noisy. You must be losing since you don't announce every move. The problem with position, however, is that it's more important to be unquestionable later on than it is to be noticed right away. Position is arranging oneself such that you are the only one who can pull the correct string, open the proper door, or land the decisive blow when the moment comes. And it's too late by the time they recognize it. Because you were quietly gathering influence, resources, information, and relationships that don't need validation while they were screaming for attention. Every move they make now puts them directly in your hands, since you were learning the game board and not responding to rubbish. Real strength doesn't declare itself. Therefore, it never cries out to be seen. It just appears one day and transforms everything. Playing for position looks like that, and it's a tactic they won't anticipate. Second, you use discipline as a weapon, whereas others use gossip. They lost before the game even began because you weaponized discipline, and they weaponize gossip. People usually resort to using their lips which are the least expensive and most indolent weapon they have, when they are unable to defeat you with ability, talent, or the truth. They know they can't touch your spirit, so they will propagate falsehoods, distort your name, and disseminate half-truths to tarnish your reputation. Their sole aim is to divert your attention, get you to respond, and drag you down into the muck where they reside. But you triumphed because you didn't fall for the ruse. You see, gossiping requires no skill. Anybody can just open their lips and start a conversation. Maintaining discipline and choosing to remain silent when you might have easily exposed them requires a great deal of strength. Being disciplined is about understanding where to focus your energy, not about being weak or submissive. None of those whispers and tiny side chats could stop what was headed your way. Therefore, you knew they weren't worth your breath. You refused to give them that gratification because you knew that every second you spent attempting to dispel falsehoods was a second taken away from your advancement. Most individuals are unaware that gossip seldom lasts forever. When people lose interest, it fades after burning brightly for a minute. But discipline, that silently creates empires. You were working while they were conversing. You were creating chances, developing, and doing actions they didn't even anticipate while they were spewing lies. Additionally, you had outgrown all of the lies they had spun about you by the time they looked up. The problem with discipline is that it works in ways that gossip couldn't. It makes you the kind of person that everyone, including those who despise you, has no option but to respect. Additionally, their falsehoods won't matter until your outcomes speak for themselves. As long as you remain untouchable, they will appear silly. Third, silence is a way to store ammo, not a sign of weakness. Silence is storing ammo, not a sign of weakness. People sometimes confuse quiet with soft, assuming that if you're not responding to their nonsense or clapping back, you're afraid, uncertain, or defeated. Their belief that being the loudest person in the room confers authority is the reason behind this. They fail to realize, however, that when employed properly, silence is one of the most lethal weapons one may possess. It's about deciding not to say it yet, not about not having something to say. Every backhanded remark, every insult, every duplicitous tactic they used against you in the hopes that you would blow up, you tucked it away in silence. Every exchange you heard, every phony grin you saw, every little act of treachery you witnessed, you saw it, and you were stacking munitions while they believed they were getting away with it. Because the fact is that when you give people enough time to speak, they will inform on themselves. Without recognizing it, they reveal their affiliations, anxieties, and motivations. Additionally, they disclose more when you remain silent. You were wise enough not to interfere with that process. It's like shooting all your shots into the air, while the adversary is still a mile away if you react too quickly. You hold off, you gather, you allow them to make their own mistakes, because you won't have to guess who they are, what they're up to, or where the traps are when it's time to move. The whole map will be yours. Your quiet was preparation rather than a retreat. You weren't hiding. You were obtaining information, honing your plan, and ensuring that there wouldn't be a retaliation when you struck. Because it feels different when you go up with receipts, proof, and indisputable evidence of who they really are, and they expect you to fold. It's exact, not petty. Silence is the only way to develop that type of strength. Fourth, you produced the outcome they were looking for. You stood out from the crowd because you produced the outcome they were looking for. You see, chaos is what they thrive on. They use a trite, cliched strategy that revolves on baiting you, making small-minded accusations, and waiting for you to blow out so they can claim, "See, told you they were unstable." The majority of people fall for it because it feels good to retaliate, to publicly check someone, and to have the last say. They fail to understand, however, that every response you provide is a payment, and once you spent it, you cannot get it back. You realize that your energy is a kind of money that is too important to be wasted on transient frivolity. You don't fight wars that won't be relevant in a week. You don't offer free attention to clowns trying to play a part in your demise. And you don't explain yourself to individuals who are determined to misunderstand you. The problem is that when you behave impulsively, you're playing their game, and the person who manipulates your emotions has complete influence over you. Early on, you decided that you would not exchange dignity for power. You were aware that you could use every little assault as leverage provided you remained composed, kept your position, and moved silently. And when you did reply, it was surgical rather than sentimental. The whole dynamic was changed by a single, elegant move, rather than a clumsy back and forth. It is the kind of move that silences a room, causes people to reconsider their underestimation of you, and leaves your adversaries frantically trying to find out how they made such a poor calculation. That's what occurs when you start producing outcomes, instead of just reacting, in ways that words could never. Results silenced individuals. They may fight endlessly about your character, your decisions, and your silence, but they can't argue with results. Additionally, you ensured that your movements would be felt rather than simply observed. Fifth, they undervalued the importance of emotional regulation. They lost before they even realized they were playing because they undervalued the importance of emotional control. The majority of individuals are emotionally driven and respond to slights, rumors, and backhanded compliments as if they were personal attacks that need immediate attention. This facilitates their reading, baiting, and destruction. The loudest person in the room is often the most unstable, not the strongest. And you were sitting back, gathering facts while they were putting feeling into everything they did. You examined the participants rather than only playing the game. You saw who was in need of attention, who was looking for approval, who broke under duress, and who relied on trickery. You became familiar with the patterns. You saw who overplays their hand when they're too upset to think properly, who becomes careless when they're envious, and who becomes sloppy when they feel neglected. You maintained your composure because winning was more important to you than demonstrating a point, not because you didn't care. Emotional discipline like that is uncommon. It makes you the one who decides how the game finishes, rather than simply another piece on the board. You were aware that you could not be provoked once you had perfected detachment. Because you were acting on facts, strategy, and timing rather than emotions, they were unable to entice you into risky actions or ensnare you in drama. In actuality, those who are unable to regulate their emotions always end up hurting themselves. You just let them. They insulted you by calling you cold, aloof, or calculating, not understanding that those were survival qualities. You held your hands close, moved silently, and established yourself as the one person they couldn't shake when they were revealing their hands in emotional outbursts. Their emotions had already betrayed them, and you were the one who wrote the ultimate act. Emotional mastery transformed you from a pawn into a kingmaker. Number 6. You were only removing variables, so they assumed you were alone. They believed that because you were just removing variables, you were alone. The majority of individuals find solitude intolerable because they mistake it for punishment. People assume that if no one is nearby, you've been rejected, fallen off, or are weak. They will never see, however, that for a strategic person, isolation is a weapon rather than a setback. You weren't lonely. Rather, you were purging yourself of diversions, duties, and connections that were disguised as liabilities. Additionally, each link you made was really a disguised victory rather than a loss. In actuality, most individuals have too many extraneous pieces on their board. Energy leeches, envious relatives, false pals, and those who secretly wish you lose but remain near in case you do. It's self-defeating to keep them around. It's not loyalty. Dead weight slows you down, impairs your judgment, and makes judgments you should be making more straightforward as you discovered early. You cleared the board, which is something that most people are afraid to accomplish. Clarity was the goal, not retaliation or hatred. Your route became lighter, your movements more precise, and your intuition more acute with each individual you eliminated. You stopped questioning yourself. You stopped giving those who couldn't see your vision an explanation of your choices. Most significantly, you no longer felt accountable for carrying those who didn't want to develop with you. Unaware that it was a power play, they murmured about your seclusion, as if it were a sign of failure. Because you suddenly have space to think, prepare, and move without interruption when you stop taking every call, attending every phony event, and having meaningless discussions. Most individuals fail at that point because they are too scared to be alone themselves with their own ideas. Instead, you were dangerous because you accepted it. You now have complete control over your future course of action, a clean board, and no obligations. And you'll have already won 3 times before they understand the results of that type of calm and accuracy. 7th, you created empires. They created networks. There is a huge difference between the two. You created empires, they established networks. The majority of individuals like gathering connections like awards. They want to be photographed with the person who is trending, mentioned by name in every discussion, and visible at every event. They create networks to boost their egos, feel important, and be noticed. However, such networks are flimsy. They are based more on convenience than true commitment or a common goal. Those networks disintegrate like flimsy furniture once the mood changes. The way you move, however, is different. You weren't here to attempt to fit in with everyone or push yourself into places you didn't belong. You didn't feel the need to fit in or be liked. You concentrated on being essential, not because you pleaded for it, but because of your diligence, discipline, understanding, and constancy. You became an asset that no intelligent person could afford to ignore. Their coworkers were after prestige, because you did more than simply network. You added value. So even when you weren't around, the people you subtly sided with were planning for the future. That's the difference. You created influence. They created followers. You constructed infrastructure. They accumulated influence. It's also odd that things become silent when you distance yourself from their little networks. Transactions fail. Projects stall. Because you were the glue they thought they didn't need. Fake partnerships fall apart. You win in the long run because of this. Empires are based on need, location, and leverage rather than popularity. You were aware that their true power lay in being the one person they couldn't function without, even if they were busy grinning and shaking hands in every room. You may now leave their table, and it will fall apart as a whole. Empire energy is that. You may defeat someone at their own game in this way without being confrontational or sacrificing your standards. 8th, you fight for legacy. They fight for moments. You've already outgrown every room they attempted to confine you to because they battled for moments, and you fight for legacy. The majority of individuals are fixated on right now. They want to win the debate today, get recognition this week, and be mentioned by name by Friday. They want immediate approval, as if it were synonymous with enduring respect. The issue with moments, however, is that they pass quickly. Although victories are satisfying, they seldom ever result in lasting progress. You moved in a different way. You were building the groundwork, not trying to win a claim. People seeing from the outside only comprehend surface-level maneuvers. Thus, you made judgments that didn't always make sense to them. While they were vying for 15 minutes of attention, you were constructing for 10 years to come. And you were aware from the beginning that decisions that leave a legacy are seldom accepted right away. Actually, you will almost always get criticism for them before you receive any respect for them. You were attempting to survive, not to follow trends. You realize that effect lasts a lifetime, but relevance fades. That's why you didn't spend time fighting pointlessly, or shoving yourself into spaces with individuals who have poor vision. You remained dedicated to doing actions that would stand the test of time, that would be significant even when no one was applauding, and that would establish you as a model rather than a warning. And you're seeing it now. The same individuals who made fun of your self-control, solitude, and quiet work, they're circling back, bewildered because the mayhem they sparked never gave them anything substantial, and the excitement they pursued died down. However, you remain here, untouchable, smarter and stronger. That is the result of battling for legacy rather than chasing moments. When you make movements that others won't understand until it's too late, you'll not only be ahead, but you'll be in a class by yourself. Nineth, you played mentally. They played in public. They didn't see you approaching since you played mentally while they played in public. Most individuals wish they had an audience. They want witnesses for their theatrical triumphs, loud shade, and small-scale power struggles. Every encounter is a performance. Every argument is manufactured to get attention, and every alliance is formed for show rather than content. You never had to compete with them in public, since they are predictable due to their desire for approval and recognition. You realized early on that true power doesn't make an announcement. Instead, it observes, listens, and studies. You saw their routines, their triggers, and their fears. You saw how some individuals overreact in an attempt to prove something, how others become irresponsible when they feel ignored, and how their lips always reveal what their masks are attempting to conceal. You were tactically, not emotionally, deconstructing while others were busy acting. The great thing about psychological warfare is that you can outthink them instead of outshouting them. You knew which buttons to hold off on hitting because the timing wasn't right, and you knew which vulnerabilities to take advantage of when the time was right. It was about accuracy, not retaliation or pettiness. Until you could certain that the result would change the whole board, not simply win a round, you never made a move. What's the greatest part? You accomplished it without ever speaking out, pleading for help, or requiring a crowd. You were gaining advantage while they were vying for their attention. It was already over for them when they discovered you weren't even playing the same game, and you secured chances while they uploaded subliminal shots. Psychological warfare is best suited for those who are analytical and aware that the loudest person seldom prevails. It's the one that masters restraint, manages time, and stealthily stacks info. And that's always been you, ahead of you, emotionally aloof and unpredictable. You will thus always outlive those who mistake performance for power.